Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of Dynasty Fantasy Football Series. I'm Davis Mattek, joined by Jakob Sanderson and Pat Carrain. This is you're either listening to this on the SportsGrid Fantasy Football Podcast feed, the Legendary Upside Fantasy Football Podcast feed, or the Full Tilt Podcast, YouTube, whatever Jakob has going on. You might be listening to this on Thinking About Thinking. If you did not hear the first episode on the rookie class, really what's going on here is we all put our heads together and ranked the top 200 players in Dynasty Fantasy Football. We did the rookies for the first episode. We're going to do wide receivers today. We all have 2 hours cleared out of our schedule. So, I'm thinking we might get to A.J. Brown at wide receiver 5 in 2 hours. I'm hoping that we're able to get that deep into it. And then we're a little undecided on what we're going to do in the next episodes, if we want to do quarterback, running back, and tight end all together, if we want to try and portion those out. We got multiple tweets, guys, about people actually wanted it to be longer. They were disappointed that the rookie show was only 2.5 hours. They thought it wasn't in depth enough.
I mean, listen, if you let me host again, I could have brought us 3. I could have done it. I believe in me.
I mean, we didn't really get down to I don't remember there being much discussion about Tajay Spears. We got to the fact that he doesn't have an ACL. We did the Jai comp, but that was sort of where it ended. I don't even know if we got that deep into Roschon Johnson. So there's plenty of meat left on the bone.
Circle back. I mean, we talked tight ends a little bit in the rookie pod.
Sure.
So we'll talk some of those guys as we talk their position, I think.
All right. So if you guys don't have these rankings in front of you, you can get them. We have them all pulled up. They're available on my Patreon. They're available on Thinking About Thinking. They're available on Legendary Upside. And consensus, we all had Justin Jefferson as the number 1 wide receiver in Dynasty Fantasy Football. We all had him there. We all had, and really, I think the top
Davis,
5,
are your ranks pulled? Are each of the 3 individual ranks pulled up for you? I did not have Justin Jefferson number 1.
Oh no, I just have. Okay, so you have Chase.
The consensus, I believe, has a number 1. Yeah.
Okay, so I did not. The way we have it formatted is we can see where they're at in the overall. We can't see the positional rankings in our formatted sheet. So I guess that's a good place to start. What is the argument for Chase over Jefferson?
I think it's just, unless you think that Jefferson is like almost a tier better talent-wise, it's just, I want the guy that's going to play the entirety of his meaningful career with Joe Burrow versus 1 year with Kirk Cousins and the rest of his career.
So it's just question mark.
It's just that. It's just like Joe Burrow is, honestly, Joe Burrow might be like, if you could pick any quarterback, probably other than Patrick Mahomes. Honestly, maybe even more than Patrick Mahomes, just because Mahomes is so adept at extending plays for eternity and finding the open guy, even if it's Marcus Kemp. Like, if you're picking any quarterback to have your fantasy wide receiver play with, I think I would pick Joe Burrow. And he gets to play his entire career with Joe Burrow. And I just don't think that he's actually that different than Justin Jefferson. If you look last year at just his healthy games versus Jefferson's healthy games, he was largely similar across the board. And at least similar enough that even on a slightly lower sample size, I think they're comparable talents, and I would just take Burrow. Like, I could see seasons in Jefferson's future where we have like the concerns that we have about Davante Adams this year, where it's like, man, I don't know if like he's still going to be good, but what if like this team's a total disaster? What if he's like the wide receiver 9 this year? I think as long as Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow are healthy for the rest of their careers, Jamar Chase is a top 3 wide receiver every single year.
You also have the out that the Bengals do the cold hard math and realize that spending $110 million on Burrow, Chase, and Higgins is maybe not the most viable way to build a team, and they let Chase walk, or they let Higgins walk. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but certainly there is at some point in the next couple of years, like a 200 target Jamar Chase season that would be theoretically possible. I do think Justin Jefferson honestly is a tier more talented than Jamar Chase. I think he is the best. I think he honestly is that much better. And also the Kirk Cousins stuff, like, I think the Vikings end themselves in this situation where they get into this offseason and they're like, the NFC stinks. Every team is so bad. No team has any quarterback. Let's just give him 2 years, $97 million guaranteed, and just punt it from there. What do you think, Pat?
Well, I don't think that's a necessarily good outcome for Justin Jefferson. I mean, Kirk Cousins is old. So like the longer
34.
they just, yeah. But I mean,
he's
like
younger than you, Pat.
Well, I shouldn't be throwing
to be clear, I don't want Pat throwing a Justin Jefferson.
No, dude,
Justin Jefferson's fantasy was dependent on
this is such a weird thing that only happens to people with our very specific niches and jobs. But at the point in which your age goes from being young for an NFL player, prime age for an NFL player, to guys younger than you are considered old in the NFL, like I'm the same age as Davante Adams, right? Where it's like, I'm on the downhill, Davante Adams is on the downhill, and that is a scary realization
to me
to have.
If you want to talk about kind of the way this makes you feel about your life, to me it really hit with the running backs. Like once I was past the point of like a prime running back, so my late 20s, I was like, oh no, I'm over the hill, So I think it does at this point, like the fact that I would have to be a Hall of Fame quarterback to be any good in the NFL doesn't bother me.
You can be Travis Kelce.
Yeah,
sure. You could be
one Kelce, I think.
Yeah, the one that's always hit for me is just like, this is such a Canadian reference, but like I was born the same year as Connor McDavid, so I remember like when he came in and he wore 97, I was like, oh my, like this is the time where like I should be starting in the NHL if my life had gone differently. And then now we're hitting the age apex for running backs, and it's going to be difficult for sure to rationalize that with my declining. But
that is an extremely Canadian reference.
Yeah, at least you're not as old as me, man. Kirk Cousins turns 35 in August, so he's actually pretty close to me in age. That's a major concern. Yeah, he is chasing Corain. He gets closer in August. It's it's not ideal if it, like after this year we get age 36 and age 37 Cousins with Justin Jefferson. What about the Tee Higgins question? Because I think if Higgins were to leave, that would probably be pretty good for Ja'Marr Chase, right?
Yes. It would put him into a Davante Adams situation.
Right. And then you get the connection with Burrow, and then like they would, I mean, Tyler Boyd is like a decent enough option to where like the offense would be able to continue moving a bit.
By the time they move on from Higgins, I think, because I think there's a chance they franchise tag him also this offseason. Okay, so by the time they move on from Higgins, Boyd would be 30, a 30-year-old slot wide receiver who's like
not great.
Not ever really, like he's never really had like stud athleticism, so it's probably going to come pretty quick for him. But they're also like a forward-thinking team that I don't know how forward-thinking they are, but they do understand their only way forward is via advancing the ball, be it with the forward pass. Like they're not. This is not a team that's going to have Joe Burrow out there with Ja'Marr Chase and a bunch of jabronis. They'll do something. I mean,
Tyler Boyd was earning targets comparably to Hayden Hurst last year. I think it's kind of going for Tyler Boyd.
It's going a bit too.
I remember I drafted a lot of Boyd. Just because I thought it was like he has decent standalone value and he has two-way contingent upside. And then Chase got hurt, and I was really excited, and I was extraordinarily underwhelmed by the value we received out of Tyler Boyd.
But he was good when Higgins was out, though. The last 2 years, games Higgins has missed, he's like 17 PPR points per game. Now, I didn't go into the game logs. It might be he had like 37 in one game and earned no targets in the other ones. I think Boyd is like he's a non-entity. He's fine.
He's fine. Like he's a professional wide receiver, but the 2019 like Tyler Boyd is gone. Like I don't think that upside exists anymore for him. And Tee Higgins, I mean, some of his like target share stats are distorted because he left so many games early, or he had games where he was like active, but he was sitting on the bench. But even per route, like 0.194 targets per route run last year, and that's on the whole year. That includes a portion of the time that Ja'Marr Chase missed. And Tee Higgins was a substantially higher target earner when Ja'Marr Chase missed. Like, I think it's clear Tee Higgins is very good. And he, of course, demonstrated massive upside when Ja'Marr Chase isn't there. I don't think that Tee Higgins is really threatening Ja'Marr Chase's alpha status. in a major way when they're both on the field. Like
I was actually shocked.
He's like kind of his peripheral stats are like not super different than the Mike Williams extended universe when Jamar Chase was healthy last year.
So I think this is a structural thing.
I think that's a little disrespectful to T.
But I was shocked to see that I was higher on T than either one of you guys, because in my mind, I'm not really a T guy. Like I don't trade for it. I've not traded for him in any leagues. I don't. I take DeVonta Smith over him 100% of the time in best ball when they're both there on the clock. But I think the reason, I mean, so we're skipping around a little bit, but I've got T at 25th overall. Our consensus is him at wide receiver 10.
Yeah, apparently I'm the lowest on T.
So just to push back, Tee Higgins targets per route run last year, 0.194, yards per route run, 1.92. Mike Williams targets per route run, 0.193, yards per route run, 1.93.
Yeah, I actually think a Mike Williams that never broke his neck is sort of like a decent comp for T.
Now,
right?
To be clear, I think Tee Higgins is better than Mike Williams in that I think Mike Williams, if he played with Jamar Chase, would have lower numbers. But yes. I'm just saying, like, Tee Higgins, so it's not like a talent comparison. It's just like in the context of how does this affect Jamar Chase, I don't think Tee Higgins is like a massive obstruction to him, is all I'm saying. Like, I think, like, DeVonta Smith, I think, is a much larger threat to an A.J. Brown than Tee Higgins is to a Jamar Chase.
Well, that's sort of interesting because Chase and T are really not different stylistically. You know, like they basically are very similar archetypes, right? Like flanker, X, boundary wide receivers, whereas A.J. Brown is exactly who he is, and DeVonta Smith is so different, like runs different routes, gets open in different ways. And actually, you know, the way the modern NFL is trending, you could see a season where DeVonta Smith out targets A.J. Brown by like some margin, you know, just because, you know, safeties are playing the Eagles this way. They're doing this to mitigate the RPOs and things like that. And A.J. Brown just like kind of runs bad for a stretch or something. Whereas I don't, in the multiverse of 17 game healthy seasons between Chase and Higgins, I don't think there's a multiverse where Higgins earns more targets than Chase.
Well, I think the difference between those offenses is just that the Eagles will give Smith gimme targets. Like, he actually gets a lot of the screen passes in that offense, and he shares that responsibility with A.J. Brown. Tee Higgins never gets layup targets. Like, they send their layup targets to Jamar Chase, or they throw a screen to Joe Mixon or whatever. But like, Tee Higgins earns every dollar that he gets.
It's so true. And nothing is more tilting than playing T in DFS and watching Bengals games and watching Chase get every layup throw. And then just every Higgins target is him having to like rise, you know, do a 2-2 Atwell high point in between two defenders.
And it's not wrong. Like, I wouldn't throw a bubble screen to Tee Higgins, like if I had Jamar Chase. But it's like, he works hard for his money for sure.
Okay. The next guys. So Jefferson and Chase, unquestioned number one. They're the only wide receivers we all had inside the top 10. I actually had CeeDee Lamb at 10. You guys were lower on him. There's this undercurrent of just, I don't know what it is, but there is this undercurrent of people not believing that CeeDee is in the same tier as Jefferson and Chase, you know, just for whatever.
He's not.
Well, he's not.
I kind of think he is. I kind of think.
By the way, you convinced me on Chase. Good. I just moved him over Jefferson. I just think for insulated dynasty value, I'm never gonna have to worry about Chase.
Is the Lamb thing just that he has not demonstrated the ability to put together the insane touchdown season? Is that the feeling?
Well, he's also like kind of a slot receiver, you know, like he still plays the majority of his snaps in the slot. He doesn't draw targets at a super high rate. He doesn't seem to have the biggest weekly ceiling.
Cooper Kupp plays a huge portion.
Yeah, fair enough. But Cooper Kupp has demonstrated a ceiling that Lamb has not. And the offense is about to get like way less interesting and more creative and run a lot fewer.
Really bad.
They're going to run way fewer plays. I don't think. I mean, maybe they won't, but I think they probably will, and that's going to hurt. He strikes me as a kind of guy who could get quickly surpassed in the dynasty market by Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jaylen Waddle. Like he's. See,
I view no this moat. Next. I view this. I think dynasty wide receiver rankings are so interesting right now because we have the super elite premium tier of scorers are all reaching an age cliff, right? So Diggs, Kupp, Adams, these guys who have been top 5 assets for so long are reaching an age where people are just downgrading them, not because of anything they've done on the field, but just because of the age they are.
Yeah.
And so a bunch of guys, Lamb, Wilson, Olave, Waddle, St. Brown, these guys are it's not artificial, but they are being moved up in both consensus and in the rankings. Again, not because of the points they're scoring, but because
I don't
actually.
I think that's a fair characterization, because they're going at the 1-2 turn in redraft in best ball.
Sure.
Hop on Underdog. I mean, you're getting Garrett Wilson like a pick after CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown's the next pick, and Jaylen Waddle might be the pick after that if DeVonta Adams is falling.
But that's being done on expectation. That's being done on what we're projecting, right?
But it's not
but I think it's
not a youth chasing thing. It's sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. Sorry, I just think the projection is like pretty valid. Like I think those three. I mean, London isn't quarterback hell, but like if we want to talk about Olave and Wilson, like and London, like all the rookie seasons were absolutely tremendous. Like 99th percentile rookie seasons, and if you believe in the environment being able to support Olave and Wilson, like I think those can be second round picks or like.
Yeah, I think Olave belongs with that. I have a ton of Olave in best ball, so I think if you're looking at how there's one thing to say, okay, here's what the market is doing in best ball, but then also like how are we reacting to that? And I don't really hear anyone saying, what are we doing with these with like Garrett Wilson on the 1-2
See,
turn?
I have heard.
You haven't heard that?
I have
all
heard,
I hear.
I have heard that.
I haven't been on Twitter a lot. It's actually glorious.
I think there's
because I was ready for a rant about Garrett Wilson later.
Well, let's do it. Let's do it because
is there a lot of pushback on him around that range?
Yeah, like okay, remember the CeeDee Lamb? So like CeeDee Lamb for the last couple of years, and I've been on the side of this. Like I think that it was correct. I've since capitulated. Like I now have CeeDee Lamb wide receiver 3. But like
some of us were there all along.
Oh, I have AJ Brown above CeeDee Lamb. Way more talented.
He is more talented.
I mean, I agree he's more talented.
Way better offense.
But I would still age and I'm just I would still rather play
that year really doing a lot for him.
Offense. Sorry?
It's almost 2. He's like a year and a half older. It's
a year and a half, but I think the bigger thing to me is just the projection in the offense. Like I just think I would project Dak Prescott for more passes to Jalen Hurts. There's no DeVonta Smith level talent in Dallas offense. I would project CeeDee Lamb to score more points than AJ Brown this year.
I would not.
Which of course Underdog drafters do not agree with, but
yeah, I'm with them.
It's tough. AJ Brown is like it's interesting because I was talking to Ben about this too because he actually feels somewhat similarly. I don't know about on the Lamb part, but just specifically about AJ Brown's ADP. We're like AJ Brown and Tony Pollard are my 2 favorite players in the NFL by a large margin, and I've never been not in on AJ Brown at any point in his career until this year. Like his price is just tough for me. Where he's going to be 26 this year, so he's certainly not old. Like it's not like the end is coming, but the like chance for him to gain value is kind of going to be over after this year, where he's going to be sort of holding and then in a couple of years declining in value. Yeah. And we haven't seen, and this is the same thing with CeeDee Lamb. Like Davis, you asked why CeeDee Lamb isn't in the same tier as Ja'Marr Chase and Justin Jefferson. CeeDee Lamb had his best season last year, 17.7 fantasy points per game. Ja'Marr Chase and Justin Jefferson have collectively 0 seasons below 17 points per game.
It's pretty straightforward.
Like I get that CeeDee Lamb's like target share and his peripherals evolved last year to that elite level. At that very, very top, I think like we get to be picky about the efficiency, right? Like that's where we get to like demand.
You could actually argue that playing with a version of Michael Gallup who couldn't walk in May last year and Dalton Schultz versus now Gallup can walk per reports, and Brandon Cooks is actually maybe
even
not
Gallup.
Yeah, is actually maybe not the best for him, right? Is that if Cooks can do a Cooper impersonation and Gallup is actually a legit third wide receiver and they maybe even get something out of Jalen Tolbert, like there would be some pressures on CeeDee's target share.
I mean, Brandon Cooks' peripherals were comparable to Nico Collins last year when they played together. I'm not super concerned that Brandon Cooks is coming for CeeDee Lamb's targets. No. I
mean, of course. Like but their supporting cast last year was really bad. And it might just collectively.
Yeah, it was not good.
It might just and also removing Zeke from the offense. You're targeting Pollard more. Like there are some ways you could see CeeDee's target share declining. But Wilson is interesting because someone posited this the other day. Is there a chance that right now we've got him collectively at wide receiver 5? Is there a chance that this is the highest he's ever valued, that actually Rodgers coming in and sort of running this, honestly, just a shitty offense that Rodgers has been in charge of the last couple of years, where like the hope is that Garrett Wilson becomes Devontae Adams and becomes the Binky. But if he doesn't become the Binky and the offense kind of looks like it did last year with Aaron Rodgers, I mean, is there a chance that we're actually taking Waddle over him, Olave over him, St. Brown over him, etc.?
That chance exists even if Rodgers is good, because those guys are such good NFL players themselves. I think the thing with Wilson, one reason I'm not overly concerned with it is that I think Allen Lazard is, functionally like an extra offensive lineman. I don't like that. Mecole Hardman has never shown the ability to even run a full slate of routes. Corey Davis might not be on the team, and it's not going to really be a huge.
They shipped the only other guy we think are talented out of town. Like the only other guy we thought who could maybe steal targets, they traded him.
Very plausible that Tyler Conklin is number 2 on the team in targets this year.
So this would be prime. That would be a prime Devontae Adams season where it's like a bunch of guys earn between 40 and 60 targets, and Garrett Wilson has a 29% target share.
And like Adams, he gets open quickly and in the short and intermediate areas of the field. He's not, and in fairness to Rodgers, who was not good last year, like he fed Christian Watson deep. Like if there's a guy who gets open at any point on the field, regardless of how far deep downfield, Rodgers is pretty good at finding that guy. So I think Wilson is going to earn targets like very easly unless Rodgers is done. This is going to be a pretty slow offense, I would guess. It's not just Rodgers, but they have Nathaniel Hackett, who, probably going to take forever to get all his words in and all this crap. I don't think it's going to be
not even really the OC. Like, the whole thing with Hackett, right, is just that they even say with Russ, right, that he was just like, do whatever you want, Russ, right? Like, and obviously that didn't work. But I think do whatever you want. Rodgers has had some level of demonstrated success. But
it's slow. It's really consistently
slow. It's really slow.
And it's demonstrated level.
Good. It'll be slow, but I do think it's going to be good. I'm on team Rodgers isn't washed. Like I think that the sharp. It seems like the sharps on Twitter are like kind of fudding the Jets. I'm pro Jets. I think Rodgers can still play. Their 3 wide receiver set for most of last year, or like for the first half of last year, was. Like Watson was not even really effective until the second half of the year. He was injured. He was part-time. So like they were playing Sammy Watkins, Romeo Doubs, and Allen Lazard. Like there was just like Romeo Doubs was their most effective deep threat. And he, by all counts, is not particularly good and was a 4th-round rookie. Like I just don't know what we were expecting out of that offense. Like that was pretty heinous. And it's not like Rodgers is particularly mobile at this point. And then we saw like Watson became a legitimate weapon in their offense for the second half of the year, and they won a bunch of games and they scored more points. Like I think, and that was that was with Christian Watson, who was also a rookie, was super raw and could kind of do like 2 things. And like they kind of made that work somewhat. Like I think that this is a better offense. I don't know why they chose to make their wide receiver room worse on purpose. That was curious decision making. But I do think
because these are Rodgers' buddies. That's why.
I know.
Yeah, and I don't think Salah was a big fan of Elijah Moore, the man. So
no.
Yeah.
That's why I keep bag defending Elijah Moore, because I'm just like, it's got to just be I'm just hoping it's a personality thing. Right?
Yeah, but Salah seems like a great dude. He seems like he has a good personality, so that makes me worried.
Well, I think
I don't even think it's just downgrading from Elijah Moore. Like I think choosing to like bring in Allen Lazard to make Corey Davis redundant is like a bad choice also. Like I think Corey Davis is a more useful NFL player. We haven't even said
catching things. Lazard is a good blocker.
Sure. The real name that's concerning is that they brought in Randall Cobb.
So he's CJ Uzomah's backup. Like that's like like, and who did you mentioned Hardman? We got a Hardman.
Randall Cobb is going to play. Randall Cobb is going to play on the 2023 New York Jets.
Yeah, I'm not really drafting Hardman in best ball for that reason. It's like he's gonna He's just gonna have his part-time bit role.
Cobb will get hurt though. Cobb will get hurt.
I like Hardman in best ball. Just I think he's like, those plays Rodgers loves to run on it's like 3rd and short and it's a 10-yard line, and he like does the I'm gonna either do an inside zone on the hot read to Breece Hall, or I'm gonna pull it, and then we're just gonna have like the one guy swing out as the other guy blocks. Like, to me, that's Wilson's in the ISO spot, Lazard's blocking, Hardman swinging out, and he is gonna have 6 touchdowns on that exact play.
Well, it actually works out because that's what Randall Cobb did when he was 24, and he can't do it. He can't do it anymore.
He can't do it at all anymore.
He can't do that. But Hardman probably can.
That's like the only thing he can do. That's like that's the thing he's like really good at.
Can I rant on AJ Brown?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, go for
it. Because I've heard this now from, I know Ben's like a little bit on the fence about his current ADP and stuff, and people are they had the same number of targets last year, like DeVonta Smith and him had the same number of targets or whatever. I just think like there's some weird AJ Brown disrespect that he was awesome last year. Like, he was absolutely tremendous last year at 2.47 yards per route run. And entering the season, there was stuff about like, well, you can't really trust AJ Brown's yards per route run because they run so many 2 wide receiver sets in Tennessee, and he doesn't have to compete against other really good wide receivers. So it's not like a fair representation of his talent level. Well, he comes in and absolutely crushes with DeVonta Smith and Dallas Goedert, who are both very good. He ranked 3rd in open score last year behind Deontay Johnson and Tyler Lockett. The dude is an absolutely elite wide receiver. I also think that some of the 1A, 1B stuff is overrated. If you look at the first read targets last year, he had a first read target on 21% of his routes. That's higher than Jamar Chase, who was at 20%. DeVonta Smith was only at 15%, which is much lower than Tee Higgins, who was at 18%. So if you think like, oh, Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase, there's really kind of a true alpha there. Well, in terms of who's seeing the first read targets, Brown is more of a true alpha than Smith. And I think that, we saw some weirdness last year with the Eagles offense because they were so dominant. They were pulling people from games. They were taking the starters out like 3 quarters in, against the Steelers or whatever.
So it's like evaluating Ohio State wide receivers for fantasy football, where it's like this guy had a 22% target share because they were beating Wisconsin 47-0 at half. Yeah,
they were demolishing people. Like what AJ Brown did last year on a per route basis, on just in terms of getting open, production, like everything is off the charts good. I have no problem taking him where he's going in best ball. In fact, I'm taking him ahead of Diggs a fair amount. So I'm actually slightly above ADP on AJ Brown. I think he's an elite talent in the prime of his career with an awesome quarterback in a high scoring offense. Like, I want all the AJ Brown.
Here's my question for you, Pat. And I hope that you can convince me, because like I said, I love AJ Brown. I would love to like invent a reason to be in on AJ Brown. And I especially love it if it's you giving me an awesome case for it, which it certainly started out. All the stats you mentioned, incredible. Like 2.59 yards per route run, out-targeted even Jamar Chase in targets per route run, 29% target share, 40% air yard share. Like, no argument. I think he is one of the 5 best wide receivers in the NFL, with like a plausible argument for 1 when you add everything he does after the catch. My only question for that is he performed so well. The Eagles offense was extraordinary last year, and it still resulted in 17.6 fantasy points per game, which is great. But like, he was earning a ton of volume. He was super efficient on that volume. He had 11 touchdowns, which was second among all wide receivers. And it resulted in like a sub-elite end result. So I guess I struggle to see like, where is that next level coming from? Because I don't know how he does any more. Like, I feel like
the Eagles are slightly worse.
It's that the Eagles
defense is worse.
It's that the Eagles defense is slightly worse, in that their schedule gets harder. Remember, they had that cake schedule. Like, they were seen as fraudulent entering the playoffs by some people, and obviously they weren't. But if they are just in more shootouts, like if we get them actually going toe-to-toe with other elite offenses and not just steamrolling people constantly this year, we're going to see huge blow-up games. That's the other reason I really like AJ Brown, is that of the 2, I think he has the 2 touchdown, 200 yard or 3 touchdown type of game because they use him more downfield. Like if they're going to attack downfield, it's primarily AJ Brown. He's also got the like Deebo Samuel level yards after catch ability. I mean, he is the big play waiting to happen. Sometimes last year, DeVonta Smith would be like, his big games are more like when they're racking up targets, when they weren't as aggressive. When he's like, I think he's much better kind of in the intermediate area. They use him more on screens. I like DeVonta Smith too. This isn't to slander DeVonta Smith. I think he's very good. I think he's fine where he's going as well in best ball. But I just think that the week to week ceiling you get with AJ Brown, and then especially if they just like throw more because they have to play all the games, you know, and then you have the like, maybe they're actually not quite as dominant and they're in more negative game script, which is more unlikely, but could happen.
A weird thing would be, what if Jalen Hurts regresses a little bit, both in efficiency or just defenses sort of throwing him things that he hasn't seen before, which, I mean, it's like, it's sort of like this Lamar thing. Like, what would happen in a season where Lamar threw 500 times? Like, what happens to Jalen Hurts if he throws 550 times? Like, it's a lot better for all the associated pass catchers.
Yeah.
Maybe runs a little less, has the new contract. I know that's a narrative that never actually comes true, but I would tell myself that if it helped.
No, I don't think you can tell yourself that. Fish swim. Jalen Hurts scores rushing touchdowns,
and that's okay.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean that passing more in the second half I can get behind. Like, because their pass rate over expectation last year was fine. It's just that then they ended up being run heavy.
There was
not as much by choice, that because they were always ahead.
There was a stretch the first 8 weeks of the season where Jalen Hurts had scored the most fantasy points of any player in the first half of games, and it was like the quarterback 22 if you only took second half stats.
Yeah.
Like it's very real.
Yeah.
It's very real. And the thing I like about the Eagles is that they were not afraid in any way. They were not like, they didn't have a conservative approach to how you win games. The way to win games in the NFL is you run the ball, you establish it, and then you pass off that. That's not their mindset at all. They would come in and aggressively attack teams with weak secondaries, didn't have pass rushes. They would throw the ball and get up big. And then, they would run the ball because they were salting away the game. Like, and if they, and to their credit, if they went into a matchup that had a really, really weak run defense and they have this elite offensive line, they would run the ball a lot. They would attack that matchup. So
they were a super predictable team. Like what they did,
were very
stuff
predictable.
That made sense. Yeah,
exactly. They did what made sense to do. Yeah. I know I definitely have an affinity for them because they were so predictable. It's a bit of a bias, but I do think that like you just need them in situations where it's like what makes sense to do here is put up points because the other team's going to put up points against you. Don't play conservative. I trust the Eagles to deliver on that.
Yeah, I think that seems all legit. Okay, the next group of guys, we have Olave.
You're telling me, Pat.
We have Olave, we have Waddle, and we have St. Brown. So the thing with St. Brown, I actually could see this being a guy. There was a time when I mean, this has happened many times. The name I always remember is there was an offseason where Kenny Golladay was like top 10 dynasty asset, like top 10 wide receiver guy. People loved him. And St. Brown, I think, is obviously better and different. But you could very easily convince me that Amon-Ra St. Brown is just fancy Keenan Allen, and that if the Jameson Williams thesis, if I'm wrong about Jameson Williams and he's not Kadarius Toney, and that he doesn't have these attitude problems and he comes on the field and he's great, like Jameson Williams has the profile of like a much more productive, much more target earning guy than Amon-Ra St. Brown. Not to discount what St. Brown has done in the NFL. I think it's sort of like trying to like discount Cooper Kupp after what he's done, because the profile wasn't what we anticipated. He was a later pick, all that stuff. But would not be that surprising to me if we do this exercise next summer and Amon-Ra St. Brown is the wide receiver 17 in our dynasty rankings. Whereas I would be very surprised if that was true of Jaylen Waddle or Chris Olave.
The thing with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, is the quarterback. Because he's just in a perfect situation right now, quarterback wise. But the guy that they drafted, I don't know if Hendon Hooker is ever going to get like a real chance. He's super old, coming off the ACL tear. They seem happy with Goff. But if Goff were to regress and they were like, no, we're going to like give Hooker a shot next year, that would be catastrophic.
I mean, it would be
Amon-Ra St. Brown.
So bad, but I don't foresee
bad news for Amon-Ra St. Brown.
But I think it would be okay for Jameson Williams. You know,
great
like
for him.
You don't
Jalen
need
Hyatt.
He's more insulated in a sense, although like, is he good? Is he going to stop gambling on at the Lions facility? Like that's sort of the issue there.
The Jameson Williams warning flags are so bright and so red that it's so like bad. it's like the parlay. Jameson Williams would love this because it's a parlay. The parlay of starting your career with a torn ACL, only earning one catch in 6 games, and then getting a 6-game gambling suspension to start the second year of your career when your team was like counting on you because the backups behind you are Marvin Jones.
Marvin
Reynolds. I created a portmanteau of the two of them. Like he fucked over his team so hard. They had no plan behind him. And I think very unwisely there. I think this Jahmyr Gibbs thing was partly inaudible as a result of the suspension. Like we
totally was.
Yeah, we got to have another dynamic playmaker because we don't know if we can count on Jameson Williams.
I don't know, man. Draft JSN then. What the heck?
Well, that's what I mean. That's what
my take is. I think that they looked at it and they were like, I don't know. I think you can talk. I think this is wrong, but I also can see how an NFL team talked themselves into this stance of Jahmyr Gibbs is the best pass catcher in the draft. Like, I don't think that's correct.
It's not.
I know it's not, but I know some, like, I don't know. I'm saying I know NFL teams think. I suspect how NFL teams think is that they just discount the types of things that JSN does. Like, I think they're like, look, anybody can like get open and run like 10-yard dig routes. But I just feel like they look at Gibbs and they're like, yeah, like, how do we replace like the dynamism of a Jameson Williams? And they like forget about the 80% of playing wide receiver, and they're looking at it as like Jahmyr Gibbs could run a great jet sweep, and like we could like use him on these like bubble screens, and like he could use him on some of these angle routes. And it's like, I don't know. I just feel like I see somebody watching Jahmyr Gibbs run one angle route, and they're like, he can do 90% of what JSN can do, but we can also give him carries. Like, I don't know. That's to me like what happened in the war room.
Yeah.
No, I think you're almost 100% like, I think that is just right. Which would be a tacit admission, by the way, that Amon-Ra St. Brown is not that guy, right? Which would be,
I think it's a tacit admission that they can't have one functional receiver.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's sort of their whole thing is like, we got to make Goff. That was the Rams thing, is we got to make Goff the distributor. He's fine at that. But for Goff to be the distributor, you can't have him throwing to Brock Wright and Marvin Reynolds.
It is a little bit.
Jared Goff is like Chris Paul, right? Like, he's not like going to score at this point in his career. Like, he's just going to walk the ball up the floor and he's going to get the ball to his playmakers. Chris Paul is currently an unemployed professional basketball player. He can have.
You mean this version of Chris Paul?
No,
yeah, like I'm saying he's late career Chris Paul. Like,
they haven't technically cut Chris Paul yet.
Okay, well, he's a soon to be. He's in transition.
He's at the stage of his career where they're trying to find ways to not have to pay him, which is definitely a conversation that the Jared Goff and the Lions are going to have soon.
Right, that's in their future. He's late career Chris Paul. Like, he can still walk the ball up the floor. He can still like make the right decision, but he's no longer scoring himself. So like, he can't just have DeAndre Ayton sitting in the post and like that be the only play. Like, he needs multiple options to get the ball into the hoop. And Amon-Ra is one of those options, but he needs another dude.
He does.
I think with Amon-Ra, like, man, I'm not like super into Amon-Ra this year at Cost and Dynasty. Part of it's not his fault. Like, I just struggled to ever be into like the sub elite, like the 15 to 17 point wide receivers in Dynasty, because I just don't think that they provide the same value over replacement as the back end of the top quarterbacks and the very best tight ends. And the very best running backs, and that makes it a struggle to get in on them.
I would not buy Amon-Ra St. Brown at this price, but I wouldn't be rushing to sell him at this price. Like, this is Goldilocks temperature. I think it seems just about right.
I think it's reasonable. And I think my only issue with Amon-Ra is like last offseason, I felt like the price said he's just a slot wide receiver. His ceiling is capped. And it was like, okay, if he ends up being Keenan Allen, that's like a massive win at his price. And then if he ends up being Cooper Kupp, that's like roster changing win. Whereas now it's like he's priced where if he has a Keenan Allen career, that's probably a negative at his price, or at least it's like a small loss, which just makes the bet a lot different. I mean, general rule of thumb, I think in anything like this where we're dealing with very small samples every year, is that if you have a lot of players who are broadly comparable and one of them doesn't look like almost any of the other players that are super successful, that's probably the one you'd rather fade. Like, I just think you need a more specific set of circumstances for a 4-6 low ADOT slot wide receiver to be scoring 18 to 20 fantasy points per game than you do for a Chris Olave, who appears to be a much more traditional elite wide receiver archetype than an Amon-Ra St. Brown, which is why I err on that side. But like in this year, I don't have any doubt about Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like in this iteration of the offense with Ben Johnson, with Jared Goff, I think Amon-Ra will continue to eat. I just don't know how resistant that profile is to change. Like, I don't think he's the same player as Deebo, but like I would even make somewhat of a similar comparison where all of Deebo's like peripheral stats in 2021 were elite. Like, yeah, the efficiency was through the roof, but he was also just earning 1 million targets and his air yard share was really good. Like, they just ran the whole offense through him. And then as the circumstances kind of changed around him, he became still a really good player, but he wasn't that like absolute central figure that was winning you fantasy championships by himself. And I just wonder with Amon-Ra, like, one of the similarities he has with Deebo is that he is primarily a lower ADOT player who thrives more against zone than man. He kind of has a more specific use case where he's not going to be able to take in those 30-yard routes, the 50-yard routes, even really those deep down the field dig routes and stuff. Like, how for the entirety of Amon-Ra St. Brown's career, is he going to be offenses that build their entire offense out of throwing to a zone beating slot wide receiver, even if he's the best zone beating slot wide receiver? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, like almost no chance, right? Like almost certainly, because you don't build Super Bowl champion offenses that way.
I mean, honestly, like, I think he would have been better off if they had drafted, maybe not JSN because they're so similar, but like
Quentin Johnson was the
Quentin
guy
Johnston,
I thought they should have taken.
Yeah. Or even an Addison, or just Jameson Williams doesn't get suspended. Like, all of those things I think are very good for Amon-Ra St. Brown because it just keeps the status quo more likely to stay in place. And I completely agree that he needs the status quo. He needs Jared Goff to be the quarterback. Jared Goff is only 28 years old. He turns 29 in October. Like, if Goff,
I would have lost that bet. I would have guessed he was 33 years old.
Doesn't he seem 33? Yeah. I would have thought he's
been in my
too.
life for so long.
Yeah, but I mean, he's going to keep being this guy for a while longer. So if it's really about what the Lions want to do. So if you're into Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think you're rooting for a successful offense with multiple weapons and Goff continuing to be the point guard and distributing really well and having them go, you know what, this is still working great. Let's keep doing this. As long as that's going, then I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be a high-end dynasty and fantasy wide receiver, overall. But I do think he is not resistant to change. I mean, not even Hendon Hooker, but like a good mobile quarterback would be a problem for him.
That's a disaster. I mean, he just needs so many. He needs a really high percentage of the routes that he runs to convert into targeted throws. And Jared Goff will do that because he's going to get the ball out and he's going to never run ever because he's a statue. Like, it's just Amon-Ra St. Brown will never be a wide receiver one with 120 targets. It's just not going to happen. Like, he's not going to have like the AJ Brown type season where it's like, or like Jaylen Waddle last year, right? Like, Jaylen Waddle only had a 21% target share last year, but he was so efficient. He was able to break so many big plays that, like, maybe that's not sustainable for season over season over season. But like we've seen out of these types of guys that are the more dynamic athletes, like in a given season, we can take, a low 20s target share or 120 to 130 raw targets and convert it into 17 points per game because you're able to break some to the house. Like, Amon-Ra is going to need that pedal absolutely locked down on him getting 160, 170 targets in over 17 games to be that wide receiver one every year.
Yeah, yes. Waddle, I think, is in some ways more resistant. We're actually pretty different on Waddle. So I have him at 21, Davis at 15, and you at 28. Waddle, and I just actually moved him up over Amon-Ra as we talked through it because he's like, okay, what's going to happen with Tua? The concussion issue, is he going to get hurt again? But to me, like, Tua is not the reason that Waddle's
interesting. I don't care. Mike White can make Jaylen Waddle the wide receiver 9 in a given season.
Yeah, or they bring someone else in or whatever. Like Mike McDaniel is the guy there, and Mike McDaniel had a really good debut season. I think he's looking like he'll be there for a while. And you also have Tyreek Hill getting older. It's possible Waddle passes him by the end of this year.
I mean, it could happen. It could happen for Tyreek in a minute.
Yeah,
Tyreek. The second Tyreek goes from being a 4.3 quick twitch monster to a 4.5 step, because the thing is Tyreek, he was like not a productive college player. He landed in the absolute perfect system for him with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, and
he's in another perfect system for him.
And he's in another perfect system right now. And I mean, not to say I'm not trading away Tyreek Hill, I'm not fading Tyreek Hill, any of these things, but this is not going to be a guy who is churning out 1,100 yard seasons at 36. Like, this is not Jerry Rice. I don't. Well,
he said that he's like planning to retire in 3 years. He says so.
Yeah.
But I also think one thing with Dynasty, right? Like, we don't even need Jaylen Waddle to pass Tyreek Hill. We can have this exact same season again. We just run back last year in terms of not even in terms of deduction, in terms of the 1A 1B type of thing.
Was it 1A 1B? There was a 10-point spread in their target share. Like, it was 31.6 to 21.6.
Okay, so you have to get into the weeds on this. I know, because I do projections in season. And so it would be one of those things where I'd get into the sheet and I'd be like, I'm not giving Tyreek this target share, and I'm not giving Waddle this low of the target share. There was all kinds of weird stuff going on with the Dolphins. There were games where Tua played a drive and then got concussed, and Teddy Bridgewater's in, and Skylar Thompson. It's just, and the other thing is, the other thing really insulating Jaylen Waddle, no one else on this roster is earning targets.
Yes.
Nobody. There's, Chosen Anderson, Braxton Berrios, whatever. No one even knows who the Dolphins tight end is. Like, no one is taking targets away.
They're the only 2 Dolphin pass catchers that are even drafted on Underdog.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say with Waddle is that, like, sort of like 1B status is I think somewhat dependent on like what you're doing. Like, he was doing everything. He had peripheral stats that you would be looking at, like, this guy's a clear number 1 wide receiver on his team. Like, to be able to achieve what he's doing in terms of like yards per route run and stuff, it's like, wow, this guy's awesome. The fact that Tyreek was also in the same offense producing like even more, I mean, his numbers were substantially better than Jaylen Waddle's, but I don't want to like punish Waddle for that necessarily. Like, I think it still shows that Waddle is very, very talented. But my point is that even if we get the same gap between the two, as long as Waddle kind of holds up his end and looks like a very talented player, then now we're entering 2024 and it's Tyreek Hill's age 30 season. And I think we're going to be, the drumbeat's going to be a little bit louder on Waddle's pass. Could Waddle pass Tyreek this year? Like, you're going to get that even if there's really no signs of it.
Yes, 100%. Waddle, I would be buying. St. Brown, I would not be buying. I think we already talked about T, who is our wide receiver 10, or to our wide receiver. And we've already talked a shit ton about DeVonta Smith. I mean, I think we all like DeVonta Smith.
I want to give the bear case on Waddle, because you guys are both very pro. I mean, I don't want to be too spreadsheet brain about this, but I will be a little bit.
Man who doesn't want to be too spreadsheet brain is about to go so far into the spreadsheets.
Like, we're talking about a guy he's like, I think his ADP right now is wide receiver 6 in Dynasty, and he was outside the top 24 in expected fantasy points per game. He was outside the top 30 in target share. He was wide receiver 40 in air yard share. It's a tough sell. Like, his production last year was fringe wide receiver 1, and it was entirely boosted by 11.9 yards per target, which is almost certainly unsustainable.
This is going to be the one time.
This is just fantasy 101 of like, don't buy into the efficiency over the volume. And I get that Jaylen Waddle like is a really exciting player and he's a really good player. I think that he is probably a better player than his target share and air yards share would say that he is in a vacuum. So I don't want to say like he is what the spreadsheet says, but his price is like very sure that he's not. Like, his price is fully buying into the efficiency and hand waving away any other concerns And I don't know. I can't get behind it. Like
I
just don't think
I'm gonna do the hand waving. So a couple things. Okay. First one being this will be my one use of this, but one, you got to watch the games, bro. Jaylen Waddle built different.
I do watch the games.
The other thing that I think this sort of gets that is feeding into why some of his target share and numbers look a little bit weird. He only played over 75% of the snaps in 5 games for them last year. There are probably a lot of different reasons for that. Whatever, but that is not what elite wide receivers do. They play way more snaps than that. I would imagine, given how shitty the wide receiver depth chart is in Miami, that increases because, for example, Tyreek played over 80% in half his games, right? And I think there will probably be a marriage of that. And I think the fact that they didn't invest at all at wide receiver probably is an indication that they would like to be going that way with Waddle. And let's just say we get a no weirdness season with the quarterback situation from them. Skylar Thompson does not appear. Mike White does not appear. Teddy, you're right, the Teddy guy. There's no changing of the game plan midweek or not knowing who the starting quarterback is going to be. It just feels like some of that weirdness that persisted around the Dolphins season could have very easily bled its way into, well, let's just build the whole ship out of Tyreek Hill screen passes, right?
Their offensive line was also terrible last year. I don't know that's going to be that much better this year, but like this was not an ideal situation at all for the Dolphins last year. And to me, it's like, look, the number 6 overall pick with elite speed put up 2.46 yards per route run in his second season and wasn't even the number 1 target earner on his own team. But that's no fault of his because he's playing alongside an elite guy. Like Jaylen Waddle's extremely good. I feel confident about that. And not only that, but like I love this offense. This is an offense I want to be invested in for the next couple years. And the guy ahead of him is aging. So to me, like the macro stuff is all extremely bullish on him. Could he underperform his current ADP and redraft? Like, yes, he definitely could. We might be a year early. We might be 2 years early, but this is the kind of guy, like in Dynasty, I'm often thinking like, I want to have guys that have really good trade value and what's their trade value going to be after this year. But there are some guys, and it's usually young wide receivers where I'm just like, I am willing to make a 2 to 3 year bet on this profile. Like this is like going to be kind of a piece of my team that if this isn't the right year for him to emerge as an absolute star, so be it. But I think things are trending that way.
Well, and the other, I mean, we're talking like dynasty theory type stuff is like, what would happen this season to have him be like what we're just talking about with St. Brown, where he's drafted as the wide receiver 17. Like I almost don't even see it. I think
he doesn't overperform in efficiency, and he is like the wide receiver 22 this year.
He'd still be like the wide receiver 13.
Yeah, he'd still be, people would, because of the guys we're about to talk about.
I don't think this offense is as insulated as you guys do, is my take. Like I think Tua is fine. I don't think that he is I think that Tua leading the most efficient offense in the NFL last year was an unlikely event. I think Mike McDaniel's a genius. I think that we have seen throughout NFL history that when coaches come in and they implement a scheme that is quite unique and quite progressive, that with an offseason to react to that scheme, defenses start to make it harder on them. Like I don't know. I remember the first season of Chip Kelly with Nick Foles and it taking over the world. And I remember the first season of the Sean McVay Rams. And it was like, oh my God, you just run 11 personnel all the time and nobody can stop it with Jared Goff. Like I foresee choppy waters ahead if the goal is to just continue to run this the exact way that it is. Like, I don't think that Tua is.
These aren't Jaylen Waddle problems, though. These are Tua problems, because I don't disagree necessarily, but
these are Jaylen Waddle problems in the sense that, like, Jaylen Waddle's underlying usage does not support his price or his production. He was doing it off of extreme efficiency. If the offense is no longer allocating league best efficiency to their weapons, then his usage needs to drastically change.
But I think he's looking at some hopefully positive regression in terms of no Skylar Thompson. And then I think the point about the routes, I mean, there is a bit of a Like there's more meat on the bone in terms of him just being out on the field.
I mean, remember the Eagles bullshit where guys were playing 65% of the snaps because they had to rotate in, all these dusty bums. This was like 2 years ago. Remember, Crane, this was like your big bugaboo. Was like
Eagles... in retrospect, actually, I owe an apology too. I can't remember the name of the wide receivers coach there, but because you were
Jalen Reagor bag
play Jalen Reagor, dude. What are you doing? Well, it turns out he knew exactly what he was doing. He was playing Quez Watkins over him. That was a smart thing to do. I am so sorry, Aaron. Something I believe. Sometimes
these next three guys are the most. Well, we talked a lot about JSN in the last episode. I don't think we need to go that much deeper into it. But these next three guys, I consider these three guys the most interesting players, skill position players, really. I mean, maybe other than talking about McCaffrey, in Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, and Davante Adams. They are first round redraft picks, particularly in the case of Adams and Kupp. They are like, you are just getting a stone amazing season from them. Diggs regressed a little bit last year, whatever. But Adams and Kupp are like, they're the guys. I mean, they're favorites to finish top 5 in fantasy point scoring amongst wide receivers. But Cooper Kupp injured last year. Adams, might be catching passes from Brian Hoyer. We don't know. I would say these are the number 2 guys that if you're shipping out a 2024 first to try and win the championship this season, you'd be shipping it to them. And Adam Harstead makes this point all the time. And he made it the other day really eloquently by comparing Smith and Jigba's ADP in startups and his keep trade cut value in comparison to Cooper Kupp. And then basically just, posting all of his amazing charts and research that he's done over the years, showing that even if you're using this 3-year window thing that we like to do in Dynasty, Cooper Kupp is actually more likely to be giving you points using historical falling data.
You better need him because you're not moving off them. That's the issue.
No, that's the thing. Every year, Cooper Kupp could score 270 PPR points this year, be really good, not miss any time, and his value is decreasing. It's decreasing.
Day. Yeah. That's the issue. I don't like the 3-year window thing at all, because if you're a contending team and you're going to use those points and you've accepted that this is a piece of my roster that I'm going to ride to 0 because I'm going to, you're still
I just traded for Cooper Kupp in a league, getting rid of Jameson Williams. I'm getting out of the Jameson Williams business as much as possible.
You only had to give up Jameson Williams and you got Cooper Kupp?
I gave up.
You had to add something.
I did. I gave up Jameson Williams and Calvin Ridley to get Cooper Kupp and Richie James.
Oh yeah, well, Richie James, I'm sure was the major key to that.
It was a bit. It was more of a key.
Joking. You're joking, but I had to negotiate back and forth to get Richie James.
I got one chief in every trade. Yeah,
exactly.
One chief in every trade.
You can't go to war. You can't go to war without the Chiefs wide receiver 6. You can't do it. But honestly, these are the types of trades.
Like, I won't give you Justin Ross, but I'll pick up Richie James on waivers and send him to
Davis doesn't believe in Justin
Ross. I don't believe in Justin. I'm not big Justin Ross is
big
not
Ross hasn't gotten you.
The other thing that I think is important about Kupp and Adams is that they are actually the type of players, unlike Tyreek Hill, who's ahead of them in our rankings, probably because, he's younger. I think if you tell me that Davante Adams is 35 years old, reunited with Aaron Rodgers in, wherever, and is still putting up 80 receptions, 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns at 35, I'm like, yeah, I don't know, pretty plausible. Yeah. I feel like both of these guys have the ability to not cliff fall due to the way they play.
I think Davante Adams is extraordinarily underrated, honestly. Like, I know that people think he's obviously really good, but it seems like the cool thing to do this year is to be like, Davante Adams is a fish pick at the 1-2 turn. Like, Derek Carr was not very good last year, and Davante Adams had 180 targets, 2,130 air yards, and a 33% target share. Like, I think that it might not last for long, but at this exact moment in time, he is every bit as good of a wide receiver as any other wide receiver in the NFL. I do think that he has proven to this point to be more or less quarterback proof. I'm not worried about Jimmy G. If you're worried about, like, will Jimmy G play? then I suppose that I understand, like, you don't want him with AOC, right? You don't want him playing with Aiden O'Connell. But
no, just Tom Brady. Get Tom Brady in there. We're good.
Sure.
But if Jimmy Garoppolo plays, I have zero concerns about Davante Adams' production this year, unless he falls off the cliff, which can happen at any time. Like another
he's 30. It's not that concerning to be 30 as an elite wide receiver.
It's great that Davis just brought up Adam Harstad, because I'm going to quote another Harstadism. But he has this article that's honestly, I think, the best Dynasty article that I've ever read, which is we're probably thinking about aging wrong. And it's basically the marble theory of aging, which is like, if you look at a curve, the age curve in Dynasty, it will look like a curve, because some players, they decline at 28, some decline at 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, etc. And if you average that all out over all of the players, it will look like it's a curve. But in reality, each individual player, at least the elite players, rarely decline in a curve-like fashion. Usually they stay more or less at the same level, and they fall off of a cliff.
Dramatically.
And it only looks like a curve when you average them all out, because the cliffs are hitting at different ages.
No player curves. The sample curves, not the
player curves.
Exactly. And so the way he describes it is like, effectively, it's like you reach into a bag of marbles, and once you hit the age apex, there starts being black marbles in the bag. And then each year after that, there's more and more black marbles, and you just reach in. And if you don't draw a black marble, then you're basically who you've always been. And if you do draw a black marble, then you're done. And it's just each year there's more and more marbles. And I thought that was the best way of explaining it that I've ever seen. Yeah, go for it, Davis.
Well, I've got a really good, people are learning better by examples than Adam Harstad black marble analogies. I've got a guy that we would have said this, he's going to age great. He's going to be putting up 80 and 1,000 until the end of time. Larry Fitzgerald, right? The most next to the line of scrimmage, just, and you would have traded for him and felt great about it. 2016, 150 target, or 2017, 161 targets, 109 receptions, 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns. You're like, dude, this guy's going to play till he's 45, like Jerry Rice. Next year, 112 targets, no injury, 69 receptions, 700 yards, and that's it. He's done.
That's it.
You're never starting him ever again.
He was 34 at that point.
His 34 season was good. His 35 season, that was it. He was off the cliff. You got the black marble. And
you do hear that. That's when you get to the over, I would say about 31 is when I'm like, I don't really want to hear about how, this guy's been so good. He's going to age so well. He's going to be Jerry Rice. Like, I generally hear that about every single receiver. So that's been elite at one point. They're all going to age super well. So if I can get them very cheap, and it's really
but there are guys.
There's differences.
I don't know about that.
I never looked at Dez Bryant and I was like, this guy's going to age well.
Or Demaryius Thomas.
But he also started to decline fairly early, so it was sort of easy to.
But even that way. I don't know, even when he was 24, this is total vibes based, but I don't know, even Julio Jones, frankly, never struck me as a guy where I don't know if I ever envisioned a 35-year-old Julio Jones being great, just because he was such so much of his game was predicated on being a physical freak.
Yes.
Whereas Davante Adams is so technically refined that I don't know, he's sufficiently athletic, of course. But I don't think Davante Adams' game is predicated off of being the best athlete on the field. So I still have.
He's never been he ran a 4.5 at the combine. He's never been.
I've got an even
Davis,
more.
Davis, would you say that Davante Adams' athleticism is cromulent?
No, cromulent once per podcast. Once we can't overuse it. I've got the Cooper Kupp one. This will put people in the right mental headspace. Julian Edelman. 2019, New England Patriots, 153 targets, 100 receptions, 1,100 yards. Next season, he's done. He's out of the NFL in 18 months. Next season, he plays 6 games. He has 21 catches. He's completely done.
What age was that?
That was age 34. I think 31 is when you price in the decline, where you're like, I could be getting the black marble season now. Also, funnily enough, I just clicked on Cooper Kupp's PFR page, and it's literally his 30th birthday today.
Happy birthday,
the death knell for
you just
for
lost
Cooper
3 spots in ADP.
You just went from being the wide receiver 10 to the wide receiver 19 in Dynasty today.
Also, it's Pete Overzet's birthday today. So shout out to Pete.
Wow, Cooper Kupp and Peter Overzet with the same birthday. That's
cool.
Beautiful. Point being, I would actually be buying on Cooper Kupp and Davante Adams at this price point, and it sounds like, Jacob, you are less interested in that.
No, I am buying on them. But I think what's more, I buy a lot of the olds, but I struggle to rank these guys because I think it's hard to rank them in a vacuum. Like Pat said it great.
We're already
like,
to the point. Yeah, we're already to the point of rankings where it's about your team.
What I would say, and there was a patron in the Bulletproof Discord who put this honestly way better than I put it in my article. But if you want to read my thoughts on it, I wrote a lot about diminishing returns and my theory of diminishing returns in Dynasty in an article, Don't Let Perfect Be the Enemy of the Good, which was on Thinking About Thinking. And basically, my point is on any of these veteran wide receivers, it's like how you acquire them and on what teams, to me, is more important than if you acquire them. In the sense that you're constantly trying to avoid diminishing returns in Dynasty. If you have Cooper Kupp and Davante Adams and Austin Eckler and DeAndre Hopkins, that's too much. You're putting yourself at too much risk. And similarly, if you just
it's not even risk at that point. Like, you will lose value. Your team will lose value this year. That is a fact that's going to happen.
And similarly, if you have if you're the person with I have 8 2023 firsts and 6 2024 firsts, you're just sacrificing points unnecessarily. The key point is you want to try and extend your expected value across your window. And if any point in time your roster is constructed such that you have surplus value at some point in your window, and then by a factor of your roster allocation that you're not going to have enough value at other points in your window, you should be shifting that. Davante Adams' best use case to your team is either turning your fringe playoff team into a bye team, or honestly, if you're just using him to get a 6 seed, you're probably using him wrong. Your best use case for Davante Adams or Cooper Kupp is you would be the 4 or 5 seed-ish without him, and now you can contend for the 2 seed with him. If you're already the 1 seed, I would not be trading for Davante Adams because his extra value to your team is just not going to add enough. The higher ranked seed in a playoff matchup in Dynasty wins on average 56% of the time. So it's a slightly weighted coin flip. You're not adding that much by making the best team better.
How do your thoughts change in best ball? A lot of these leagues that
I value less valuable in best ball.
I value that that's a lot less in best ball because you're first of all, the replacement level is higher, right? The replacement level becomes a lot more insulated because you're not starting a guy whose floor is 0, right? One of the appeals of starting a Davante Adams is that it's very rare that he's fully goosing
he's
you
getting 8 on his worst game.
Right. There's some level of reasonable expectation of a floor with a Davante Adams that you don't get if you're starting, I don't know, Brandon Ayuk or whatever. But yeah, in best ball, you're just using less of the games, right? So it's if we were to say he has 30 games left of peak Davante Adams, but you're actually only starting Davante Adams in your lineup in 21 of those, he becomes a lot less valuable. And in the games that he is producing a lot of points, he's producing less points above replacement because the replacement level is higher. In best ball for sure, I'm not targeting these veterans as much as I am in managed. The point being, if you're targeting any of these vets, you want to use them as much as humanly possible. So you want them in your lineup every single week, and you want to make sure that it's materially changing your win expectancy in that year. I do target a lot of the vets, but I'm also usually targeting teams that are very pick heavy in the future and that have youth. So I'm building through the idea that I'm going to let value expire in my roster. I'm going to use those points to the max, and then I'm going to have to backfill it later with draft picks. I don't want to be overextended where I just have tons and tons of vets and then I have to tank for 2 years. That's where you get into problems.
Yeah. I think a couple other things with Adams that would make me more interested in him is, so I'm in a league where I have Adams and it's 3 wide receivers and 2 flexes. It's not super flex. So you can start up to 5 wide receivers, PPR. Ideally you are starting 5 wide receivers. And there's also a 3-week sprint in the playoffs so that there's no individual matchups. The best team is more likely to win the championship. So in that situation, I don't know if I'll end up, I'm definitely going to shop him. I also have CMC on that team. So having both isn't ideal, but it's possible I go into the season again with him, but I really like that setup in best ball. in the same league where Davis traded for Cooper Kupp. I was also in talks to trade for Cooper Kupp, and I ended up just deciding, you know what, I'm going to try to win with depth at wide receiver and not lose that value.
You almost pulled an absolute heist using Sky Moore as a piece that retained some value in that trade. So I don't know. I probably would have made that trade if I was you.
I'm kind of getting back in on Sky Moore too, but I do want to know before we go on a Sky Moore tangent. I'm the highest on Cooper Kupp of all of us. I'm the highest on Davante Adams of all of us. So I'm in on these guys in the right situation. But I think, just to underline the point you were making, Jacob, of like thinking through how you're adding these guys, I think is the whole game. Like, you do not want to just be like, this guy's the highest in the ranks, I'm drafting him now. Like, these are specialty pieces. They do a thing. You need to add them to the right teams, and you need to understand that as soon as you put them on your roster, they've already lost trade value. In the startup, when you draft them, is the moment you click that button, they lose value, because now someone else has to go, am I going to really, they have to do the same thing that you had to do. Is this the right team to add a Cooper Kupp? And several teams in the league will already feel like, no, this isn't the right home for a Cooper Kupp. So I'm already not interested. I think that's a really great point is when you're acquiring assets, you can only trade to like 4 or 5 other teams. That inherently limits, like, everyone would do a deal for AJ Brown at the right price, but not every team will do a deal for Davante Adams at the right price.
Absolutely. Here's the other thing quick that I would add on some of these vets is I wouldn't necessarily you can't plan on doing this because these vets could fall off a cliff at any time or they get injured at any time. But I do think there's like a weird thing that happens in Dynasty where a lot of teams, they get into arms races at the trade deadline, especially in super active leagues. What I'm more inclined to do is, like, again, the number one thing you can do to improve your odds of winning a Dynasty championship is to get a bye. Like, once you get into the playoffs, you're almost never going to have a better than like a 2/3 chance of winning league, unless you're in the type of league that Pat just talked about. Normally, you're in a series of weighted coin flips. So the number one thing you can do to improve your odds is to take away one of the weighted coin flips. And if you do have the Davante Adams and the Cooper Kupp, like, I'm fine holding them now. And I would consider at the trade deadline, if you are the 1 seed and you look like you're going to clinch a bye, do the counterintuitive thing, make your team slightly worse. You've already accomplished the number one thing that you can do in Dynasty to increase your odds, which is to secure the bye, trade some of that excess production once you've already gotten the number one thing you can get out of it at the trade deadline, and then just see where it goes. But then you've protected your downside moving forward and extended your contention window. Like, I think this is a great time of year to increase your chance of winning this year. Once you've already accomplished that, your number one goal at that point, there's really not that much more you can do to improve your odds to win that year. Number one thing you can do, extend your contention window.
I completely agree with that. If you can, I mean, that's the thing too. Like, people don't ever want to do that. And that's why you kind of end up seeing teams that like go from like win now to, you know, oh God, what do I do with this team? You know, this is how orphans are created, essentially. Like,
right.
You can trade away like one. It's not that you have to trade away Davante Adams and Christian McCaffrey in my situation, but I would like to trade away one of those guys, get some pieces back. McCaffrey's probably the guy that I'll shop more because I think I'll probably be able to get more for him. And potentially this is a league that values running backs a little bit. And I'll be able to hopefully piece together the running back production, maybe get a younger wide receiver piece or something, or a pick, and just kind of keep it going. You know, just like, you never have to, if you can manage it, it's difficult, but there are situations where you can just keep being in playoff contention every single year. And maybe not every one of those years you're going to be in the 1 seed situation, but you keep the perpetual, what Sean Siegel calls it, I think, perpetual championship window or something. But this is the idea. You don't just go all in for any given year.
Sure. All right, let's move on to the next range of guys. I think Debo is pretty interesting because we have like both samples of him being
we totally bypassed my guy Drake London. Hey,
yeah, let's talk Drake London. I mean,
Drake, you're just playing quarterback lottery. If they end up with some serviceable quarterback, you have this huge win. If he remains on the treadmill of Arthur Smith, Desmond Ridder, Marcus Mariota mediocrity, he'll never join that top 10 echelon.
My only thing that I'll say about Drake London, as I know we're going very long and we're already an hour 20 in, is that I don't think for the rest of the time that we play Dynasty, we will ever have another 8th overall pick who puts up a 29% target share as a 21-year-old rookie who is not valued as a top 12 wide receiver in Dynasty. Like, I just think this is such an extraordinarily rare opportunity to buy what seems to be, by all accounts, a special player that people don't think is very special. I just don't think that his situation is going to be this bad forever. Like, maybe it will be this year. This is the one player where I'm very willing to take a short-term loss if that's what results, because sure. I think that the long-term gain is going to be quite massive. And I don't think there's really any hole in the profile. Like, I've seen some people be like, oh, it all just came when Pitts was out, or like maybe if they pass more, his target share wouldn't be that high. Okay, sure. But there's just no piece of data on London that suggests that he isn't great. Like, he was the 8th overall pick, had a great profile as a college prospect, 29% target share, had a higher PFF receiving grade than either Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave. Like, anywhere you look to grade out wide receivers, qualitatively or quantitatively, he looks fantastic. And he's 21 years old, and he's quite gettable. And I just think that makes him like a really, really massive buy, where you're getting him, especially like in a startup, early 4th round. You're not paying as substantial of an opportunity cost in production to get him as you are for some of these other guys.
He's my wide receiver 10. I'm bullish. I like him. I just moved him up ahead of Dak Prescott and Bryce Young. So as you were talking, I was getting even more bullish. But yeah, I think that wide receiver 8.
Yeah,
nice.
I do have him behind Dak, but that's because I love my quarterbacks.
And Mike McCarthy is not gonna do very well for you this year. Comparing him to Tee Higgins, who we have just behind him now that I've bumped up Drake London a bit. But like, to me, like, I'd much rather have London, because I have this potential for him to emerge as a target dominant wide receiver 1 on his own team. And he did so last year he looked good in what is probably like a worst case scenario quarterback room. And Marcus Mariota was so bad that they were refusing to pass the ball at all. And Desmond Ridder stinks. But the nice thing about Desmond Ridder stinking is that he's a 3rd round pick who stinks. So they're going to have to move on from him if he doesn't get better this year. And Taylor Heineke is the backup. Like, this is not it's sort of the reverse Amon-Ra St. Brown thing, where the status quo sucks, but at least the status quo is so fragile that they're going to have to move on from it, unless we get the unlikely outcome that Ridder blossoms. And okay, I'll stop shitting on Ridder if he blossoms. That's great. But I think Ridder has to show a lot, or they're gonna do something else after the year. Don't trade for Trey Lance. That would be pretty bad, because then we're looking at low volume passing offense.
Well, that would be really bad. But I don't know. I don't think Trey Lance would be long for the world.
Yeah.
Here's what my best case for Drake London is. Do you know how many seasons of a 29% target share DJ Moore has? He has 0. And DJ Moore, who's the perpetual great player, bad situation guy, his current ADP is the 5.10 after 5 years in the NFL, and still projecting to be in a low volume passing offense with a quarterback who has not proven that he is good. So Drake London could have 4 more years of this. And his closest analogy in terms of a player is currently less than a round and a half behind him in ADP. And that's if his worst case scenario continues to happen for 4 further seasons.
Yeah, that's insulated value, we call that.
I mean, DJ Moore has never had a good quarterback, and probably just entered into like somehow like a better quarterback, but a worse target situation. And I mean, I don't know, you could probably still get a 2024 first for him.
You 100% can. 100% you can.
Yeah. A guy I was surprised we were not. I mean, we were all kind of, Pat was obviously really bullish on Treylon Burks. And then I was 10 spots lower, and then you were 10 spots lower than me. Are you are you swayed by the reports that he can breathe now, that he can properly oxidate his muscles playing football now?
I am going to get a ton of Treylon Burks exposure in best ball, and I just won't have that much in Dynasty. I mean, I think it's very possible that Treylon Burks is awesome and that my ranking of him looks really silly. But I also don't think that we have reason to be super confident that he's even great. Like, good prospect, had some flaws. I think that we basically saw all of those flaws in the first year, right? All the knocks on Burks coming in was he's not a real wide receiver. And then he didn't necessarily perform as though he was a real wide receiver.
I would push back strongly on that. And you can check out Matt Harmon's reception perception. He talks about how they played him as a traditional X wide receiver.
But he didn't excel in that role.
He didn't excel, but I thought that this guy's a gadget player knocks were quite loud. I mean, he was basically like, this is the next LaVisca type of thing. And
right.
That is not what happened at all. He was not relegated to a part-time gadget player role. And yes, he didn't excel, but I thought he was pretty good. I think the issue is like, how much more was he going to do had he not been concussed on that touchdown catch that he had? Because it looked like he was kind of ramping up.
I mean, he was fine. Like, his numbers in a vacuum are totally fine. Like 0.208 targets per out run, 1.7 yards per out run, like pretty good for a rookie. He was on like the worst wide receiver depth chart in the league as their first round pick. So to me, like, if I think that there was a much higher ceiling there, where if he was like a really high caliber player, like he could have consolidated a ton of targets there. But it's hard to say. Like, I just don't really have an opinion on Treylon Burks, I guess, is my point. Like, he was playing, and then he would be not great, and then he would start to really get some positive momentum, and then he would get hurt. And then he would come back and he'd start generating positive momentum and he'd get hurt. Like, we just never saw enough of a sustained stretch for me to have like a confident take on who Treylon Burks is in either direction. So just knowing how wide receivers are, like, usually if you're really good, we find out in year 2 or year 3. So to me, like, getting that discount on Treylon Burks in best ball is really appealing, where we can draft him quite affordably. If he's awesome, I think we're going to see it this year. It's going to have a massive payoff. In Dynasty, it's just a little tougher, because in best ball, if he sucks and you burn your round 6 pick on Treylon Burks, like, that's really not that harmful to your team. If you burn essentially first round rookie pick value on Treylon Burks in Dynasty and he's a dud, like, he just has not that much insulated value at this point. So hard for me to invest a lot in him in Dynasty, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's really good. I don't have like a confident take that he's bad. I just don't have a confident take on him really whatsoever.
So I'm more bullish on Burks in Dynasty, but I do just want to kind of highlight that I really like that approach in terms of Dynasty versus best ball, because like, I think people view Dynasty as more of an upside game than it is. To me, Dynasty is a downside game. It's about,
you don't want assets going to zero.
It's about managing your floor. Like, it's the one, like, fantasy is all about upside, but Dynasty is not really about upside so much as about managing your floor. And the nice thing about the way real life football works is that if you're managing your floor, you are building an upside, because most of the time managing your floor means staying young, moving to assets that are like, it's not about like going from Burks to, an aging vet. It's like using Burks to get to another young player who's maybe a little bit more insulated, which still creates a high upside team. But I like doing that, where you take shots on a guy, because best ball is like the upside game, right? So it's like, if you're overweight Burks in best ball, if he duds, I would say if he duds in the 6th round, that team is kind of dead. But like, your portfolio's not, it's like you took a shot, you capture the upside if he blows up. But you don't necessarily have to be overweight in Dynasty.
Dead. Like, I've got,
well, it might not be dead.
I hit the final in like, I had best ball mini final 2 years ago on a team with Calvin Ridley at like 2.1. Okay. Like, I think you can do it. You mean the rest of your team needs to be really good.
I mean, Kareem, you didn't use your 2nd round picks points.
I think I had Hunter Renfrow in the 6th round last year. So actually that undermines
there you go.
my argument. But
hurts your team.
It hurts your team. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think if you're playing a lot of different forms of fantasy and you think this guy is really truly boom bust in a way that's, the market is going to feel that boom bust, like Quentin Johnston's boom bust, right? But like, the market's probably not giving up on him after this season. But Burks is in a situation where the market could give up on him after this season. So if you're a little bit shaky on the eval, I like the way Jacob's playing.
I mean, let's just year 2 wide receivers. It's, people like to target the year 2 wide receivers for good reason. Like, that tends to be a lot of time the year they break out. In best ball, I 100% agree, because you kind of want that high variance bet. Dynasty can go both ways. Like Elijah Moore post year 2, Rashad Bateman post year 2, Chase Claypool post year 2, Laviska Shenault post year 2. Like there is a significant graveyard of players that we had reason to like going into year 2 that the bottom really fell out. And you know, maybe Bateman and Elijah Moore recover from that. I'm somewhat bullish on both of them, but it's just it's a scary proposition to have for sure in Dynasty. I don't know. It's tough sell for me for Burks. Like, and the one thing I would say too is like your wide receiver in Dynasty in particular, because the older wide receivers, like what do we talk about on all the in best ball constantly right now? It's like you kind of can't get wide receivers you like after round 7. That's just not the case in Dynasty. It's not hard to get wide receivers that you like for this year because Tyler Lockett's going in like the 12th round. It's pretty easy to get functional flex wide receivers that you would expect to produce similarly to Treylon Burks. If wide receiver to me is just not the position where betting on a guy to provide that value of replacement for you himself is super likely. So the most likely upside scenario for a lot of wide receivers is that they rise in value, and then you can use them in trades for either super elite wide receivers, elite quarterbacks, elite tight ends, or elite running backs, instead of like this guy is now the wide receiver 15 himself. So to me, like I would just rather bet on guys that I am more confident that can either retain value that I can use in trade or potentially rise in value. Like you mentioned Quentin Johnston. Like I would just rather go for Quentin Johnston. To me, that's a much safer bet with fairly similar upside.
Yeah, I have no issues with that. I have Johnson 2 spots behind Burks in my ranks. I think partly the reason that I'm higher on Burks than you guys is that I'm higher on some of the wide receivers and lower on some of the kind of the running backs who I view as kind of like 1 year bets. Like the market's going to decide on a lot of these running backs in the same range, the same way it'll decide on Burks. And I think my long-term payoff is much higher on a guy like Burks. So I don't really disagree. I mean, I do slightly disagree with the Johnson thing, but I think it's like kind of flipping a coin to some extent or a personal preference sort of thing. I'll make the upside case on Burks a little bit. I mean, he was a first round pick. He was utterly dominant at Arkansas. You do get but how did he do it? And I think some of the how did he do it in a lot of ways was kind of gadgety stuff that wasn't going to translate as much. But one of the things that I wrote about when he was coming out is that like, okay, let's subtract some of the screen stuff. Let's subtract some of the gimme stuff. How does he look now? Like, well, he's still hitting the breakout thresholds we're looking for. You know, was he good deep? Yes, he was actually very efficient as a deep receiver. It was on a smaller sample, but he did flash that he can do that. I think it's very bullish that they used him as an X wide receiver, that he was playing, the full-time outside wide receiver role, that, they view him as that guy. I think that's really good. Unless they sign DeAndre Hopkins, he's now set up to be like a huge target earner if he's any good at all. He had 1.75 yards per route run as a rookie, which is a good number. That's what Jaylen Waddle had as a rookie. So to me, like, it hasn't been perfect. It's been, a little shaky. The market has lost confidence, which I do think you should factor in to some degree. But first round pick who had an efficient rookie year and now steps into a situation where he can earn a bunch of targets as a second year. And I also am starting to become a little more confident that we are looking at Ryan Tannehill for a lot of this season, because why are you talking to DeAndre Hopkins if you're going to play Will Levis at any point early in the season? And if we get Ryan Tannehill for, 3/4 of the year, like that would be huge for Treylon Burks. I think Will Levis stinks, but there are downside scenarios that are really awful here. Tannehill gets benched early. Levis sucks. Burks has a bad year. You're eating it. So it's more, I think, if you buy that he was a really good prospect who, kind of flashed as a rookie, or you think not such a great prospect, don't love his rookie year. If you're in that, if you lean towards that, I think, maybe it's time to move on.
Well, what's interesting is that a guy we all ranked lower, Jahan Dotson, had a better season, but is not viewed in the same tier, despite being a first-round pick, because he plays with Terry McLaurin, right?
I actually ranked Jahan Dotson higher, for the record.
Oh, there we go. Well, consensus, he's lower. But yes, you did.
Yes, he is lower.
This gets back into the Waddle stuff again of like, how much do we care about a guy being the second guy on his team?
But I also don't Okay, so I have a tier from 61 to 71 in my overall ranks. I have exclusively wide receivers, 11 of them in a row. And you could frankly like spin a wheel in terms of the order, and I'm pretty content with however you do it. Like I don't have a overly strong take on like Dotson versus Burks. I mean, I think that's an interesting one where like Burks, I think, has the higher upside. If one of these wide receivers is a top 12 wide receiver this year, it's almost certainly Treylon Burks.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure that I would say that Jahan Dotson had a better rookie year than Burks. Like Burks, his targets per run was higher, his yards per run was higher.
Significantly higher. Dotson was actually slightly concerning in yards per outrun.
So like, I don't even know that I would say Dotson was better than Burks as a rookie, but I would say that he provided a rookie season that is more that provides me with more confidence that he's at least an NFL wide receiver. And I guess like at wide receiver, I am very floor focused in the sense that I want to have enough wide receivers that are good enough that I can use them as trade chips, that I can stick them in my flex with confidence, etc. I also think Dotson, I put out a Twitter thread on him a while ago. I think that, you know, we mentioned Burks with having some viable injury excuses. I think Dotson does too. It was really a tale of 3 seasons with him. He started his season totally lock boxing. Like he was running all the routes, he was earning none of the targets, and he kept ending up in the end zone. And then he hurt his hamstring. He came back and he sucked for a couple of weeks, like really sucked after the hamstring. And then he turned it on down the stretch. And I do wonder sometimes, like most of the time with rookies, we see them get better over the course of the season. And a big reason for that is oftentimes that they're earning more routes. And a lot of times the coaches are doing that logically. It's like, this guy isn't ready to be good enough to run 100% of the routes from week 1. And so then less of their sample, when we look back at their rookie year, is with them running all of the routes. And so usually the time that they're running all the routes is when they're progressing a little bit more as a player. Maybe this is too fan fiction, but to me, like, I don't really want to punish Jahan Dotson when we look back on this rookie season for the fact that the Commanders made him run 100% of the routes almost basically from week 1 when he clearly wasn't fully ready for it. Like,
yeah,
he just has, and they were passing so much early season. Like those first few weeks with Carson Wentz, they were like, he was running like 50 routes in some of those games. And, you know, Burks' stats in a sense are being sheltered by the fact that he was not a full-time player from absolute jump. He eased into that over time. A lot of rookies do. And late in the season, when Dotson was a full-time player, he was putting up around 0.2 targets per route run. He was a lot more in the realm of what we want to see out of really strong rookie profiles. It's just his sample is really lagged by a lot of those massive volume route games, and then kind of get stunted by a hamstring injury. So I don't know. I think that oftentimes we'll see in Dynasty where we try to focus on per route stats, and then sometimes we miss and we wonder why. And I could see this Dotson versus Burks situation is one where we do miss, where Dotson's raw numbers are better, Burks' per route numbers are better. And it wouldn't surprise me if Dotson is the better player, and we look back and we kind of can backfill some of these reasons as to why that ended up being the case.
It wouldn't surprise me if Dotson was the better player, but it would surprise me if Dotson was the better player and Treylon Burks is good, is really what it comes down to for me. I think Dotson's rookie season was it was whatever. Like, it wasn't terrible, but, you know, he did not rate particularly well in open score. He had a 46 rating there. Burks was
Brushed
higher.
Matt Harmon stuff, for the record.
What'd you say?
I just said, however, like,
Matt Harmon likes
I don't know.
him, yeah.
I don't know which one is better. Like in terms of like looking at, I kind of view them in the same general like archetype of qualitative data. Like Harmon really liked Dotson. PFF graded Dotson higher, I believe. Maybe that's wrong. I don't have that in front of me right now. I know Harmon really liked Dotson. You mentioned Burks was higher in open.
Harmon
score.
liked Dotson, but he actually didn't have the best success rate versus man. He was fine. Okay. In Harmon's data, he was solid there, but he wasn't particularly strong. He ranked lower than Burks in open score. Burks was good in open score, not like amazing, but I think pretty good for a rookie, especially given that we're like, his ability to win was sort of the question, especially from the outside. And he was running, per Harmon's data, he had 75% of his routes were on the line of scrimmage, which is, again, going to the thing of this guy was playing traditional receiver. George Pickens had 70%. DeVonta Smith was at 70% as well. So like Burks was playing traditional wide receiver. I think you're right in terms of them easing him in terms of the number of routes that he was running over the course of the year. But the Titans, I would say, in no real way eased him in terms of like, hey, here's your transition into this kind of classic outside NFL wide receiver role. You didn't really do so much of that in college. Let's get you comfortable with stuff. They didn't do that. They said, you are our X, play X. And in that role, he delivered 1.75 yards per route run. To me, it's a bullish situation, but I understand why people are a little bit more sketched out.
I will say in Dotson's defense, so I have Harmon stuff pulled up here too. 69.9% snaps outside, on the line for 66%. So he was also playing a lot of variable wide receiver. His percentiles, 60th percentile versus man, 64th zone, 87th press. Burks was 23rd, 24th, 24th.
Yep.
All right, I don't think that's the end all be all. Like, I don't think that's the only thing we should look at, but it is something that
it is helpful that the player tracking data, goes with Burks. I do like that we have mixed signals on that at least.
Yeah.
All right, we got like 20 minutes left after 20 minutes on Treylon Burks and Jahan Dotson. Let's do this.
What?
Let's each pick one guy outside, this premium tier that we think is like an extremely good buy right now. In terms, we just talked about it being a downside game, but you do need to harness upside to some degree. Yeah. Like buying a wide receiver who goes from wide receiver 33 to wide receiver 17 and off. I mean, you could buy yourself a first round pick for that.
Oh yeah.
I definitely have a guy in mind. I think it's incredibly obvious, and I actually cannot believe that this is Chris Godwin's price. I cannot believe that Chris Godwin is the wide receiver 28 and that we all had him in the 60s. Not saying it doesn't make sense, but I'm saying if this is how the market is viewing him when Mike Evans is still his teammate and some combination of Carson Wentz, Baker Mayfield, or Kyle Trask is going to be his quarterback, and it's not like this is a guy who is reaching his age cliff season. I mean, Chris Godwin is still he's 27 years old. He's got 2 years before the age cliff stuff even starts to filter in to our thoughts. And I think there are a number of ways he can go up. I mean, one, he can go up in sort of the shitty situation. The quarterback just needs to, I've actually compared it to how Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham were being used in Cleveland before Odell got cut, where Landry was actually mostly fine with Baker, despite Baker getting worse every single year. I mean, 2019, for example, 83 receptions, 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns in the year. Like, just everything was going bad for them. But Odell couldn't get open. Odell could not get fed because Baker couldn't push those throws, which is sort of common with mediocre quarterbacks. They can get it. They can complete 6-yard slants. They can't complete 18-yard posts, right?
Right.
But but he's got way more outs than that. He's got trading outs. He's got the Buccaneers decide they don't want to do the rebuild and do, they give they're the team that gives Kirk Cousins the big guaranteed contract in the offseason. Outs. There's just a lot of different outs. And one, I feel extremely confident that Chris Godwin is good. I mean, that's the biggest prior here. I just think he's very good at football. And I also anticipate the market responding positively to Mike Evans falling off a cliff with Godwin, which feels like it's been coming for a long time. I would be surprised if Evans is even good this season. Like, I don't take Mike Evans in best ball much, but I do take Godwin. And Godwin is just one of these guys that people like too. Like, go look at his DFS. Yeah, go look at his DFS ownership percentage. Any week he's been in a good spot. Any week Mike Evans has been bagged up. And people just like Chris Godwin. I think he's an awesome buy right now, because I don't think he'll be horrible for fantasy this year, even if the Buccaneers, kind of like what we've talked about with Rachaad White, Corain, you and I, where it's like the offense can be terrible, but just by value of being out there and getting the work, you're going to sustain some value. But I would actually think whatever the worst case thought you had for Godwin, it's existing right now. He went from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield. Like, we're living the nightmare. Yeah, we are living the nightmare for Chris Godwin right now, and it's not even really all that bad.
So I've been, and I don't like this one. There's some places that I'm kind of like on an island with a lot of our crew on various players, and I'm like comfortable being on that island. I don't like that I'm on the not as bullish about Chris Godwin island, but because I do think Godwin's good as well, but it has, and I'm quite above consensus or the ADP or whatever on Chris Godwin as well. So I don't mind the call, but I do feel like people are a little bit overconfident about this situation. The one thing we do know is that this is going to be a very bad team with bad quarterback play. That's what we should be confident about. What happens after that, we shouldn't be particularly confident in, because it's not a good situation. Like, there's going to be some frustrating games here. The way you laid it out, that Evans is hurt more than Godwin, makes logical sense to me. However, I do think we should at least note that Mike Evans was still good last year. In Matt Harmon's write-up, he was saying he's probably not like at his peak, but he's still looking pretty solid. He finished pretty well in open score as well. And then you have to look at Chris Godwin. Yeah, he's coming back off an ACL tear, so that matters. And hopefully the second year back, he'll improve. We saw Cooper Kupp, his blow-up season was his second year off the ACL tear. The ACL tear probably hid just how good he was the year before. But he was quite poor in open score. He finished below DJ Moore, who we've talked gets mentioned that he kind of had a down year last year. Finished below Noah Brown, just ahead of DJ Chark. It's not a particularly auspicious season to be coming off. So you really do have to buy that he's going to improve 2 years removed from the ACL tear, which is a fair enough assumption. But there are like a few things that you get into with Godwin where you're like, the situation sucks, but Evans is going to fall off, and Evans is a worse fit for Baker, and he's going to improve from the ACL tear. Like, there's some serious red flags here with Godwin.
I'd forgotten that Godwin came back too fast from the ACL, hurt his hamstring, and then came back and was still pretty good.
I want to give you a player A versus player B. That's mostly
it's always the bad faith player A, player B is my favorite.
This is the most
bad faith. I want to give you a bad faith player A, player B. We're an hour 50 minutes in, so you're getting a bad.
By the way, I'm the highest on Godwin of all of us, so this might be more of a redraft take for me. But
okay, player A, last 3 seasons with at least 8 games played. Target share 21.8%, air yards share 16.8. Next season 21.
Wait, say that again. Target share what?
Target share. Okay, I'll give target share and air yards share for the last 3 seasons with at least 8 games played. Okay. So 21.8 and 16.8, 21.3 and 19.4, 18.9 and 20.6. Okay. Next player, 17.4 and 16.9, 19.6 and 15.4, 18.3 and 23.2. Who do we think player A and player B are here? Pretty similar zones in the good vision camp of the 2020 target share, air yard share.
Well, one of them is Chris Godwin.
One of them's Godwin, and then one of them's some bum like Juju or something.
That's exactly who it is. Yeah, it is Chris Godwin and Juju Smith-Schuster. That's exactly who it is. The last time Chris Godwin had an impressive peripheral season was 2019. I think that he is one of the most overrated real life players in the NFL. I think the most overrated real life wide receiver.
I agree that his skill set is
Jacob. No one smart agrees with me except you. Thank you.
I agree.
I don't know. I think Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. I will admit that if you look at the data that share of team targets and air yards versus pass attempts, when the raw pass volume goes up, the average share does go down. So I do think that the shares are going to come up a little bit for Godwin and Evans as the pass volume goes down. But like the last time that Tampa was outside the top 3 in raw pass volume was like 2018, I think. Like Chris Godwin has been in an absolute ideal situation for his entire fantasy career. It's not like this is a guy who is producing in a okay situation and is now going to a bad situation. He was producing in an unreal situation. And in many ways, I think his production was buoyed by that situation. He was now going to a potentially terrible situation. I've also seen
Potentially is nice. That's a nice way to describe the situation. It is a terrible situation.
And I've also seen people say, like, and I mean, these are two of the people that I have the most respect for in the entire industry, so I'm not using this to denigrate them, but like, I listened to Ben and Sean's pod recently, and they were talking about, like, Tampa's, like, they were like, there's some players that are hurt by both efficiency and volume. Tampa wide receivers are going to get hurt by efficiency, but probably not by volume. I don't know why that's fully expected to be true. Like, I get that they were a very high volume team last year on overall pass attempts. That wasn't their intention. Like, they weren't actually throwing on early downs at a particularly high rate. Like,
no, they were awful. It's just they were
they were running the ball a lot.
They were running the ball on early downs, and then they got behind, and then, like, Tom Brady just runs so effectively when he's in the 2-minute situation that they could just pile on pass plays in a very, very quick order. He also never runs. He doesn't really take sacks. So when they do drop back to throw, he's converting those into targeted throws at a really, really high rate. All of this is untrue of Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield frequently will have games where 30% of his dropbacks don't result in the target because he's either throwing it into his lineman's face, or he's getting sacked, or he's scrambling. And I don't think that they had the intention to pass as much as they did last year. So I think that's going to balance out a large degree. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if this is one of the 10 least efficient passing attacks and the 10 least voluminous pass attacks in the NFL this year. I think Chris Godwin's a good NFL wide receiver. Like, to be clear, I said it was a bad faith comparison. I think he's a much better wide receiver than Juju Smith-Schuster, but I don't view him, like, I'm not even sure that
we kept faith
like
alive on Juju
and DJ Moore good.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. We kept faith alive on Juju for a long time as a redraft and dynasty community, you know. So I think in some ways
he's the wide receiver 50 in Best Ball Mania 4 today, right now.
Yeah.
Like, which is
much better offensive environment than Chris Godwin.
Which is, look, you're not
That's
wrong.
true.
That was my point, though, is that I think Godwin, I mean, I actually agree with the point that he's maybe a little bit of an overrated NFL player, but I think the skill set that he provides in fantasy football is really valuable, which is like kind of what we just talked about with a bunch of these other slot guys. Like, he just gets open really quick. That's his deal. He gets a lot of these layup throws, and the layup throws are going to be pretty important if Carson Wentz is quarterbacking the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 1 of the 2023 NFL season.
Carson Wentz has never thrown an accurate pass less than 10 yards downfield in his entire life. The only thing Carson Wentz can do is throw deep balls. Like, if you ask him to hit a slant, he
sucks at it. He sucks at deep balls, and it's by far the best thing he does.
Yeah, but he sucks at everything. Yeah,
he's brutal.
The year that Carson Wentz was the quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts cost me 10 years off my life expectancy.
All right, we got 6 minutes. I got a heart out. You guys you guys can speed run your guy.
I'll go really fast. Okay, the further you get down the board, the less I'm looking at reasons why this profile might not be as good as it looks, and the more I'm just clinging to any possible indicators of a ceiling. And especially when you compare that with a young player with a high pedigree, sample size be damned. So last year, first round pick, stud production profile throughout college, posts a 23% targets per route run and a 2.38 yards per route run. And he's currently draftable as the wide receiver 42 in the 10th round. And there is no clearly obvious good wide receiver on this team. There is a new pass-friendly offensive coordinator coming into town, and potential for this offense to be much more conducive to fantasy success. I think that Rashad Bateman is the only young wide receiver that I have legitimate confidence is a good NFL player with, I think, legitimate potential to be a great NFL player who you are not really paying a ceiling case for whatsoever. You can certainly say that Willis Frank is a concern. You can say that he only ran 120 routes last year. That's obviously a massive concern. That there is some level of target competition, but I think that the target competition only hurts. I think this applies to both Flowers and to Bateman, which is that I think they only hurt each other if they aren't actually that good. But if one of them is really, really good, the others shouldn't be that concerned. And I think it's pretty unlikely that both are elite, right? Like, I think if Bateman just comes out and he's awesome, he can alpha Flowers and vice versa. You're paying a lot less for Bateman. That's a guy that I would really love to target. I think him and Moore are kind of the only two guys that I have, like, I think it's over 50% chance they're good NFL players that are young and that have legitimate upside that you're not really paying for.
I like that one a lot. To the point that now I'm not sure if I have one. Can I do Marvin Mims? Is that an acceptable thing and not the rookie show?
I mean, look, if you want to Josh KJ Hamler 2.0 to the people.
I do. I want to Josh him to the people. Rashad Bateman, by the way, I am the highest on in our rank. So the real Rashad Bateman bull never got to say his piece. I'm like 9 spots higher than you in our ranks.
I'm like 26%. I'm like 26 spots higher than ADP. So you must be really high.
Well, this is
true.
This is true with all these wide receivers. I noticed as we went through. I mean, because like some guys, we're like not ranking guys that are going at like pick 111 in startups. Like some of these running backs, we just are no interest.
I'm gonna move Rashad Bateman up.
I do love that. I mean, to me, this is like why we're doing this, is to dial in these ranks. So move them up.
I'm gonna move my head up Kenny Pickett. I'm gonna live a little.
Do it. So one reason I like Marvin Mims, right? The one thing that we know about the Broncos situation is that Sean Payton is going to be their coach next year. That's definitely what we know. Yeah. We don't know who the quarterback is, but in some ways that's a good thing, because if Russ sucks, we're not stuck with Russ. We also have the certainty, I think, that some of these wide receivers who are here now will not be here entering 2024. Tim Patrick would probably be the highest on that list. They cannot move on from him this year. His $10 million in dead cap, $11 million cap hit. They're not going to cut him for, less than $1 million in savings. But next year they can save $11 million by moving on from Tim Patrick. They will do that. That will help. We also know that they're quite willing to move on from Jerry Jeudy, from Courtland Sutton. I think we could see a big shuffling of this wide receiver room, and one that could lead to quite a bit of more projected opportunity for Marvin Mims entering his second season. This is a guy who looks like he could flash in limited routes as a rookie. He's a deep threat. He's got the speed for it. He's a little undersized at 183, but he's got legit speed. He gets open. That was a big point of emphasis for Peyton after he drafted him, about his separation ability. So I don't know how well we can, how much production you could really count on for Mims. Essentially sort of a red shirt type of player. I throw him into best ball rosters because, maybe he gets there a couple of right weeks for you. Should be coming on down the stretch a bit, which is helpful for best ball. But in Dynasty, this is a depth pick. But it's sort of like you're banking. It's like one of these picks. Sometimes I learned this from Sean Siegel. You can trade away your future picks and get into young players, and then you can get production. Essentially, you're getting production out of your picks for not all that much more risk. And Marvin Mims would be a nice example of this, where his situation is really set up for his value to increase after his rookie season. And if you get the unlikely but plausible scenario where he is productive this year, that is a grand slam. And if you get he just flashes, but things shuffle predictably given these contracts, then you also win. If he stinks, then you're in trouble. But you still get, hey, he's a second-year player with Sean Payton. Maybe you can get out, at a loss for sure, but not a catastrophic loss. So I just think he's sort of a classic. Everything's tilted to the upside with this bet.
There we go.
I mean, Courtland Sutton is just DJ Chark, but 1 year behind every step of the way, right? Like, I don't think he's as much of an obstacle as.
He was good once.
He was good that one.
So was DJ Chark.
Yeah, fair enough.
The year before he tore his ACL, he was really
DJ
good.
Chark, Michael Gallup, and Courtland Sutton have had like the exact same career arc. Like they were like
I'm still bagged
really great
Michael
second
Gallup.
Year, major injury, bad.
I still believe. All right, Jacob, shill the people, tell them where to go.
You can find all my written work on Thinking About Thinking, jacobsanderson.substack.com. It's been a busy 2 weeks of bar exam prep. So I've only had one article up there recently, but I'm going to get some more up there this weekend. Going to have my players in the top 100 ADP in best ball to build championships around. I'm also doing a more real life focus with some fantasy application ranking of NFL backfields as well that I'm going to run through soon in the next week or two.
Yeah. Karain, Legendary Upside. What are the people getting?
LegendaryUpside.com/early. You can get $30 off still for about another month. I'm running that deal. $30 off your first year. Takes the price down to $69. I do still have like a few Underdog credits left. If you're playing on Underdog, you can get a $50 Underdog credit. If you sign up, you got to fill out a form, which will be in the show notes of the podcast on my feed. And then, you can get Dynasty rankings. Obviously, we got these collaborative Dynasty rankings, but you can also get best ball rankings for Underdog, DraftKings, and had a couple strategy pieces out last week. Working on a couple more right now.
There we go. All right, everyone, make sure you're subscribed to all of these podcast feeds, and we'll be back with part 3 soon.